Hi, welcome to the Off the Record stage. My name is Josh Rivers. I'm the creator and host of the award-winning podcast, Busy Being Black, which centers and celebrates queer Black liveliness. Thank you for being here this afternoon and for this fireside chat between two people that I'm personally a huge fan of. The topic of today's discussion is the diversity, equity, and inclusion industry. And to help us have that conversation is Ashleigh Ainsley, the co-founder of Colorintech, and Terence Guiamo, Global Director of Inclusion at JustEatTakeaway.com. Please welcome them to the stage.
Wow, these lights are bright. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for listening. To the people in the back, feel free to come forward. Really great to be able to have this conversation today. For those who don't know, my name is Ashleigh Ainsley. I'm the co-founder of Colorintech, and Colorintech are the organization that brings you Black Tech Fest today. So I am really happy to be here, and more so than anything, I'm actually really delighted to be with the JustEatTakeaway.com team here today, and Terence as well, which we'll come on to in a moment, a little bit about some of our work together. But for those who are a bit less familiar with the work that Colorintech do, we are there to try and help get more people from diverse backgrounds into tech. So we do things like this. But we can't do things like this without a couple of ingredients. Kind of a pun there, if you get what I'm going, yeah? But the idea around that is that we need amazing companies who care, which is a really important thing because, to all the companies here, and especially, Just Eat on this stage right now, the idea around that is that we need support. I can't point people to stuff if the door is shut. And then the second thing that we really need is the industry to care, because without that, people don't support. Without that, there is no allyship, there is no inclusion really at the table. But over the last few years, we've seen a few spikes. I think everyone will kind of have an idea of where the energy in the room went kind of post George Floyd. And out of a really tragic circumstance, everything was really up there. Everybody wanted to get involved, people splashing cash, doing various bits and bobs. It was very in vogue to care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But no surprise to me, we've seen a bit of a roller coaster on that journey, and I think it's a bit sad to say this is the exception, not the norm today. We don't have many spaces like this, and people go to work next week and it won't be like this. There won't be people talking about inclusion on some of the topics out there. And this got me onto the thinking about the idea of, is diversity, equity, inclusion, are these conversations, is this old news? Is this it? Are we done? Like, that was the hype cycle, it's vogue, there's something else that people care about now. Is it over with? And I was like, okay, I have opinions on this, but I need to talk to someone who's actually doing it. Do you know what I mean? I can have my thoughts, but it's a lot more informative of having an informed discussion on that. So that's where the conversation topic from today comes. So I was like, okay, who's the best person to talk to about that? Someone who's doing it. And I was like, ta-da! And then we got to. So that's where Terence comes in. Terence, for those who don't know, has been a really big supporter of Black Tech Fest. He's spoken a number of years as well, and really great that he can be here seeing it in person. So I'm going to ask Terence that question almost to begin with. But also, Terence, it would be great if you can share a little bit about your story, your background, your journey, why you do what you do, and ultimately why you get to your opinions around that fundamental question of, is diversity, equity, inclusion old news? And is some of this work just like maybe a tick box activity for people? So let me know.
Yeah, and thanks a lot, Ashleigh. First of all, great to see all of you over here. And I think a big applause for Ashleigh for organizing this and making sure that this is happening right here, right now, right? Yeah, because it's really amazing to be here and to see all of you, and actually to see how Black Tech Fest is actually growing and growing and growing, and that's all work from you and the team. Yeah, who am I? I work now 2.5 years within Just Eat Takeaway. I'm based in Amsterdam actually, but lovely to be here in this wonderful venue. And before that, I've worked for PwC and for other companies. And what I've actually constantly done is trying to understand how you embed IDMB or That's how we call it, DEI, in organizations. And it all actually started with representation. I was in an organization where I felt like all directors were actually not a representation of myself. And how can you then actually understand what your customers need? So I think it's so important to constantly make that connection, and that's why I keep saying we need to step into each other's world, in each other's shoes, to better understand what's actually going on. So my drive is actually to make sure that we include all those different perspectives, and especially to make sure that we understand the other perspective and make sure that we include it.
Got it. So if we then come on to that question, obviously you're in conversations, you're talking to some of those executives, you are in that room where people are like, look, it's a hard choice, Terence, but do we really need to do this? Or, look, we've got a woman on the board now, like, let's just clap ourselves. Like, you know, these kind of conversations that people will be happening and saying, like, how, I suppose, to what extent is my pessimism around some of those conversations correct? And then also, to what extent would you say that that is something that's shared across the industry?
Yeah, I think, well, in all honesty, some of it is true, because I think a lot of people are also skeptic about this topic. It's everywhere, and some people are also maybe getting a little bit tired about the topic. But that's also why I think it feels a little bit like we're only talking about skin color, gender, all these kind of things. But actually it's about, do we really understand everybody, and do we make sure that we are willing to learn from all those different perspectives? A very simple example. If you're introvert or extrovert, how do we make sure that we use both qualities? And quite often in organizations, we focus on more extrovert people, and it feels almost, and there are leaders, more than enough leaders, who would even say extrovert people are the ones who will be a success and will be the new leaders in the organization. Wow. If that's really what you're thinking, then you're missing a really important lens. So for me, it all starts with a very strategic approach, making sure that when you start with this topic, to really set up the clear pillars of what this topic is about. And that's the same thing that we've done within Just Eat Takeaway. We actually built a quite simple framework. So it's 3 pillars: lead, deliver, care. It's connected to our values. We need to lead by example, and we need to make sure that we hold people accountable, and that we set up the data to really understand what it's all about. Secondly, how do we make sure the environment becomes more inclusive? So we call it organizational inclusion, so embedding it in all the processes and policies in the organization. And thirdly, it's about caring about everybody's story and belonging. And how do you do it? First of all, awareness and empowerment. And especially a lot of people, when I say awareness, they think of trainings, etc. But for me, it's always connected to that accountability, because a standalone training itself, I don't feel that's really doing something. And the empowerment part especially is an important one in terms of how do we make sure that people feel empowered to have those sometimes very challenging conversations. And thirdly, how do we make sure we share each other's story? And that comes from, you have a story, I have a story, what can we learn from that? And also, how do we include those stories to the rest of the world? And that could be through our channels, but also simple thing like our annual report.
I want to jump in there, because on the story thing, so I think this will be a familiar experience to many people in this room. But sometimes people want to almost use that story for their own needs. And I'll call that tokenizing. You know, someone will be like, right, so we've got the employee page, like you're the token minority in the room, you're the token there. Can we use your story to sell us? So, yeah.
Yeah, I immediately want to jump into it, because I think, especially you mentioned Black Lives Matters, and I think what especially happened after Black Lives Matters is that everybody kind of understood, oh, I need to include black people in my campaigns. Then I've solved the issue. That was the part that was missing. No, you've missed the whole point. The whole point. The whole point is how do we include people and better understand what's going on over here. And everything also about the history. I mean, that's a whole other chapter that we should actually cover. But I'm always trying to see what are the things that we can do in an organization. So I do believe that there are situations where organizations do that. And that's why I think from the Just Eat Takeaway approach, we said, one of the important things is, first of all, bring the people together. So we have ERGs, employee resource groups, where we bring the black community together, but actually different ERGs that we have in the organization. And then the next step is, how do you make sure that we include this in the things that we do? So that's from a learning perspective, but especially from a strategic perspective. And when I started, I immediately said to everybody, inclusion, diversity, and belonging is connected to actually everything that we do. And I know it sounds big, but it is that big. Because why it's so big, it's connected to people, behavior, culture. And whether you're talking about your colleague, you need to step into their world to make the connection. Whether you're talking about your customer, you need to step into their world to understand, hey, what is the thing that they need, and what is then the product, whatever that product might be, that we need to bring. And a lot of people, by the way, think that our product is food, but our product is tech. And it's all about constantly that mindset of understanding what's going on the other side. And I think that's the journey that we constantly need to be on. And the other part that I always keep repeating also is, how do we make sure it's going to be part of the strategy? And why am I so focused on the strategy? The strategy is what drives the company. For the Just Eat takeaway, our vision is empower everyday convenience. There's so much already in there, because how do I empower you? How do I empower every individual in this room? And then everyday convenience. How is that exactly? What is your convenience? What is my convenience? Etc., etc. So where I'm really proud is actually that in 2.5 years since in the company, we made it to embed our IDMB into the strategy on the organization. And what it actually means now for me is that every time we talk about the strategy of the organization, we need to talk about this topic as well.
And that's putting on the agenda, but, and I mean, you know, here's a free hit I'm going to give you. Tell me how it's worked. Tell me what some of the successes of it being there have been. What have you seen that's kind of moved the dial? If, you know, if someone's saying, okay, Terence, that's great, I'm going to follow that model, but, you know, people are going to tell me, you know, we're going to put this on our agenda. What's the result of it? How has it changed, you know, the organization? What's been the success for me?
Yeah, and first of all, let's also be honest. We're on a journey. So I wish I could say we've achieved everything and almost say my work is done. No, the work is still happening. And with having it in the strategy, you could almost say the work really starts right now. And in terms of how it works and what are the things that really work for our organization, several things. So one is, how do you make sure that it's part of the strategy of our product? How do we make sure that our product is inclusive for everybody in the organization? A very simple thing. Orange is our color. But the orange that we actually use is not a very accessible orange for everybody, especially if you see it in an online platform, so on the app or on the website. So we created an accessible orange so that people who are visually impaired can easily see that color as well. A very simple example of how you make sure that it's inclusive for more people in the organization. Other example is we set up a mentoring program, we set up an early career talent program, and we make sure that we focus on the underrepresented groups. So although a lot of people might not really love setting ambitions and targets from a data perspective, I think it's very crucial, because that's how you really move the needle and make sure that we focus on it. And that people just can't say, oh, we've covered it with one person. No, that's not enough.
It's quite interesting. It leads me on to a conversation I was having, because I was at dinner the other night and we were talking about for global companies doing this, and France came up. And for those who are a bit less familiar, France has some really strict, I suppose, and rightly so in some instances, requirements around what employees have to do to make reasonable adjustments at work. So on that, like colour blindness or accessibility, and actually leverages fines, as is the law there, for companies and organisations that aren't compliant. And you know, and I won't exactly say the organisation, but the cost of compliance was a lot lower than the fines that they were getting. So, you know, from that example, that is kind of just even why it makes business sense to do. Like, you're going to get hit by it, so you might as well start from a perspective of how do we do things and make them inclusive.
Well, actually, what I would say is taking the fines is sometimes cheaper than changing the organization. From a digital perspective, I do think the fines might be higher. But for instance, for hiring people with a disability, I've calculated the fines. I would almost say it's cheaper to take the fine than to build it in your company. And that makes that you really have to make clear what is the why for your organization to do this. Because if it's only a financial a driver, it will be challenging sometimes to really include it in the things that we do. So my focus is especially also from a people perspective, and how do we make sure we also care about our people. And that's why those 3 pillars are constantly important, and also important to repeat those pillars. I sometimes have moments where people start saying things about, oh, I'm not allowed to use the word Christmas anymore when we give a present at the end of the year. And then I'm like, that's not a conversation I'm actually trying to have. What I'm trying to do is go back to the strategy. We have those 3 pillars, and let's focus on those 3 pillars, because that will help us to the next step.
Got it. So if I change tack slightly, I would say diversity, equity, inclusion, ID&B, it's under attack. I think if we see some of the initiatives and press and lawsuits, frankly, that are coming from the other side of the pond, if we see some of the rhetoric that are coming from, some of our policymakers across the world, not just in the UK, but also in the UK, I think it's fair to say that, there's even this idea about like this kind of concept of like weaponizing being woke, as if it's like somehow bad to be socially aware of injustices in society. And I think wherever you look, I would say it's kind of a bit under attack. And that kind of leads us to be a bit, thinking about, okay, so what happens moving forwards? Like, what's your perspective on kind of where we go from here? Because I suppose almost you probably haven't received as much resistance to your work as now as in maybe if you did, say, 2 years ago or maybe even 5 years ago. Now people are actively working against some of the stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, it's the environment is definitely changing, and sometimes it's definitely becoming more challenging. I think personally, what is mainly under attack is diversity. The fact that we start talking more on diversity, and that we're actually talking about how you could see it is changing history. And I think a lot of people are like, whoa, what's going on over here? And all of a sudden, I need to understand everything about you. Why would I, But I think, although that is under attack, the other part, the inclusion and belonging, is the part where I still believe that we could make really good progress. And the thing is, whatever you do, wherever you are, it will always play a role in your life. And most of the time, I simply use the example of the alignment between intention and impact. You can have really good intention, explaining something to somebody, telling a beautiful story, coming from your heart, and then at a certain moment, this person is like, wow, that really hurt me. Negative impact. And it feels for you like, huh? Why is that the case? Because I told it it came from my heart. It's the best story I could tell you. But you're using maybe language, words that hurt you. And that is the moment where you should try to align with the other person. Why does it hurt you? What is it? What are the things that I'm using that are not feeling so great for you? And then let's have the conversation. But quite often what happens in that intent versus alignment thing is that we immediately say, yeah, but I said it with good intention, so it's all good. And
freedom of speech. That one comes up a lot. Freedom of speech as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, in the terms of you can still say what you believe, but be mindful of the impact that it might have on others. And we can always find a way to have this conversation in connection with each other instead of in disconnection. And I think that intent versus impact is a very powerful thing to constantly keep in mind when we're talking with people. So your colleague, your friend, your customer, your partners, whatever.
So that kind of brings me on to setting the agenda. Because that's kind of a responsive thing. It's kind of like, okay, someone said that, okay, this is how I'm thinking to respond, or okay, I'm going to move within the intention to be kind and stuff like that. But if I think, so, today obviously we're at Black Tech Fest, and, there are 3 components to that. We're talking about the technology, we've got tech companies here, there's a festival, we've got the music and the food. But especially if we're talking to the black community, I don't know if people saw it at the cloakrooms, but again, down to the details, we were really particular. We put 2 stats on there. One was that 50% of black professionals feel like they need to leave their organizations in order to progress. So that's half of the people in this room feel like they need to go somewhere else in order to get forwards in their organization. The second statistic was 0.6% of black women, well, 0.6% is the proportion of black women in tech from the data that we can find. Quick hands, actually, and I appreciate not everybody might be able to see this. How many, does that surprise anybody? Put your hand up if you are surprised. And just so I can hear you're listening, put your hands up if you're not surprised. Got it, so I've not sent people to sleep. So
They're still here.
yeah, they're still here, you're still with me. So my question to you, Terence, on this is, how does the black community go about setting the agenda? Like, how do we move from kind of not responding and just being thankful for being in the room, but almost controlling what's on the agenda moving forwards? How do we be intentional and actually put those things? Because, you know, you're yourself, you're a senior professional. You, when you walk into the room, often will be setting the agenda because people are there to talk to you, to work with you. But not everyone has that privilege. So how do they also put things on the agenda? How do you reflect on that as a leader from your perspective, empowering your teams as well?
Yeah, and I think, first of all, these stats, it's so incredible, actually, because sometimes we hear them and it's like, oh yeah, that's the case. But it's actually very shocking, right? Very shocking. And I love the fact that you included the intersectionality, because if you're looking at black women in the industry, and actually across all these industry, that's maybe the most challenging area. And I believe that every single time that we have the opportunity to voice our opinion, voice the things that could help us drive this further, or every time a moment of change. So for me, it's everything about, it feels sometimes maybe even a lot of pressure on you when you're the only person in the room who's black, who's woman, anything. But it's at the same moment, it's also the opportunity to bring something to the table. And I know how challenging that is, because quite often, are you really being listened to? Do people really take you serious? But I always try to find the moments where there are people that might make a change and that could have that moment of rest to really listen to you. And those are the people that you could surround yourself with and help them to drive you as well. And another thing, importantly for me, is make sure to have a senior sponsor in your organization. And what a sponsor for me means, you have a coach, you have a mentor, which is very interesting, but I always say that's very reactive. I come to you and I say, well, I got a feedback. I'm not very visible in this organization. What can I do? And by the way, that's something all of us quite often hear, right? We're not visible. Well, the visibility is connected to a lot of things, because which projects are you getting? Which customers are you getting? What are the big visible things that we get in the organization? That leads to the visibility also in the organization. But in terms of the sponsorship, it's for me more about how does the sponsor also make a success of you? So it's not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. First of all, we learn from each other, but second of all, we both have a responsibility there. And believe me, every white person who made it to the top had a sponsor. But quite often we don't say that, because it's just something who looks like you. And then we think, hey, that's a nice guy. I think I'm going to give him this project, or I think I'm going to do this and, you know, support this person. Well, that's somebody we also need. So I always try to focus on that sponsorship for myself, to be a sponsor for people, but also to be mindful that I have my own sponsor in all those rooms to make sure that I can progress. And that's something very tangible that people can do. And believe me, it sounds a little bit maybe uncomfortable to reach out to one of those senior leaders in the organization, but they will love it and they will embrace it. So go for it and get your sponsor.
Got it. And almost on that, maybe that's how I flip that 50% around, because Maybe there's just 50% of people who don't have that in their organization and come to Black Tech Fest to find somewhere that they can. So that's the positive side. So look, I'm a big advocate of it. If it's not working and you can't find it in your organization, I've tried to bring as many of the companies that I can in one room to show you that there are people that care. There are people here that are interested and will want to sponsor and will want to advocate for you. And that's partially why we do today. But
can I add one very quick thing? Because I always call Oprah Winfrey my best friend. But she has a very important thing, and especially since it's Black History Month and we need to be focused on our sisters. One thing that she always says, if they don't see your talent, don't be mad at them, but maybe you're in the wrong space. And go make sure that other people see your talent because you have that talent.
Amazing. How can I end on that now? Like, how can I? Can't give me the mic there, Terence. It's just like quite open, everything. Okay, well look, what I will say is take that from Oprah via Terence. And the Just Eat team have an amazing booth literally downstairs. Go and talk to them. If you have been inspired by this conversation, you think that there is a leader here that could potentially mentor, sponsor, advocate for you outside of it, you're right, because he's literally here. There's many places he's flown in, Amsterdam, or maybe US, I don't know, wherever one it is. However you got here, it's here because it's really important. And the Just Eat team know that, and that's why they're making today happen as well. So big thank you to them. Please go and say hello to the team downstairs as well. You're all interested in this conversation, so let's continue the dialogue. And apart from that, really thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of Black Tech Fest as well. We've still got lots of great stuff. And please do hang around for the drinks afterwards as well. Softs are available too. Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.